The dream always ended the same way. She turned from the window, stone arch, pine forest beyond it, snow falling in the kind of silence that is wait, and said something I could never hold past waking. 3 words, maybe 4. Her mouth shaped them, and I came awake in the dark of my chamber with the words already gone, and only the face remaining. The line of her jaw in candlelight, the way she held her hands when she was thinking, the small scar at the corner of her left brow that I had catalogued so many times in sleep that I could have drawn it from memory in the dark. 40 winters. I had been Alpha King of Valdremar for 40 winters, and for every one of them I had dreamed her face. I did not speak of it. I am not a man who speaks of such things, and in any case there was no one to tell. My advisors thought I grieved. They had a story ready for my silences, for the council seats I left empty of Aluna, for the way I deflected every candidate list they brought before me. Myra, they told one another quietly. He grieves for Myra. She had been my intended, a formal arrangement, never a bond, not truly, and she had died of a fever the winter before the sealing ceremony could take place. It was a clean grief, explicable. I let them believe it because the truth was not explicable, and kings who cannot explain themselves invite chaos. The truth was this: from the winter I turned 30 and took the throne of Valdremar, I had dreamed the same woman. Not Myra, not anyone I knew. A woman with practical hands and a small scar at the corner of her left brow, and a way of going very still when she was listening that made the whole room feel quieter. In the dream we were always in the same place, a stone chamber with a pine forest beyond the window, snow falling, candlelight, and she always turned and said something I could not keep, and then I woke. I had ruled for 40 years. I had held the mountain passes against 3 incursions. I had rebuilt the eastern granaries and reformed the bond registry and adjudicated 1,000 disputes between packs who could not agree on territory lines. I had done all of this with my wolf running quiet beneath my ribs, the way a river runs quiet under ice, present, patient, not gone. My wolf had not chosen. In 40 years he had looked at every woman the council paraded through the great hall of Valdremar and felt nothing. Courtesy, yes. Respect in some cases. Not recognition. Not the thing the old texts described, the settling, the knowing, and so I waited, and the council grew older and more anxious, and I grew quieter, and the dream kept coming. I am telling you this so you understand what it meant when I saw her. It was the 2nd week of the month the mountain folk call the Iron Month, when the cold sets its full weight down, and the pass is close, and the household at Valdremar swells with the winter intake. Servants contracted for the cold season, tradespeople from the border villages, the small auxiliary staff that kept the great hall running through the months when supply lines thinned. They arrived in groups, processed through the registry by my seneschal, assigned quarters and duties, and dispersed into the general life of the hold before I had any occasion to take notice of them. I was not paying attention to the winter intake. I was standing at the far end of the great hall, in the spot near the eastern hearth where I habitually stood when I wanted to think without appearing to think, and I was listening to my senior steward Pell Arvin read from the agenda for the afternoon council session. Border levy adjustments. A petition from the Westholt Pack regarding grazing rights. The annual argument about whether the Moonseal Chamber needed remortaring, which argument I had declined to have for the last 6 years on the grounds that the chamber was 300 years old and had not yet fallen down. Pell was mid-sentence when I stopped hearing him. Not because of a sound, because of a face. She was crossing the hall at the far end, near the servants' corridor, carrying a stack of folded linens that she held with the particular care of someone who knows that if one piece slips the whole pile goes. She was not looking at me. Why would she? She was looking at the floor in front of her, navigating the uneven flagstones that everyone who worked in the great hall learned to avoid by instinct, and her head was slightly bent, and the light from the iron lanterns caught the angle of her jaw and the small scar at the corner of her left brow, and I went completely still. My wolf went still with me. Not silent, not absent. Still the way a hunting animal goes still, not the blankness of nothing, but the absolute focus of something found. I had seen that face 10,000 times. I knew the scar. I knew the way she held her hands, both of them curled inward slightly at the wrists when they were occupied with a task, as if she were always on the verge of using them precisely. I knew the way she walked, that unhurried, direct movement that took her from one point to another without wasted motion. I knew her. I had been dreaming her for 40 years. And she was here in the great hall of Valdremer, carrying linens down the servants' corridor, and she had not looked up. "My lord," Pell said. "The grazing rights petition," I said. "We'll hear it third after the levy. Move the Moonseal question to next session." I turned back to the agenda. My voice was even. My hands were steady. Inside my chest, my wolf was pressing forward with a slow, insistent certainty, like a man leaning into a door he knows will open. I found out her name from the winter registry that evening. Senna Orrell, from Tarn's Edge, a border settlement on the eastern approach, 300 people, mostly trappers and smallhold farmers, no pack ranking of note. Age, 34. Skills listed, household, service, linen keeping, some kitchen experience. Wolf gift assessment, none recorded. The border village pack registries were often incomplete. It meant nothing, or it meant she had no gift, or it meant the assessors hadn't come through Tarn's Edge in years, which was equally likely. I set the registry page down and looked at the name for a moment. Senna Orrell. I had never heard it before, which was not surprising. I had also never seen her before in any waking moment of my life, and yet every line of her face was familiar to me in a way that nothing in my waking life had ever been. I thought about what this meant for a long time in the dark of my chamber that night. I am not a man given to flights of interpretation. I have governed too long to indulge in them. But I was also not a fool, and I had read the old texts, and I knew what the fated mate bond was said to do in cases where the two people had not yet met. The way the wolf's soul could spend years reaching towards something it could not yet name, dreaming the mate before the body ever found them. 40 years was a long time, perhaps an unusually long time. But Valdremer was remote, and Tarn's Edge was 300 miles east, and if she had lived her whole life there and I had lived mine here, with no occasion to cross paths. I did not let myself finish the thought, not yet. A face was not a bond, a dream was not a destiny. I had seen her once across a large hall at a distance. I was going to be careful. I was not very careful. The second day, I found reasons to walk through the linen corridor twice. On the first pass, I saw her working with 2 other women, talking quietly, measuring cloth against a wooden frame. I kept walking. On the second pass, the corridor was empty, and I felt something ridiculous and said nothing to anyone about it. The third day, she was in the kitchen passage when I came through on my way to the morning review, and she stepped aside and said, "My lord," with a small, precise nod, the way any servant would, and I said something brief and continued, and then stood in the morning review for 20 minutes thinking about the way she'd said it. Not nervous, not performing deference, simply accurate. Here is the form this situation calls for, here it is, cleanly done. The same directness I had watched her use to navigate the flagstones. My wolf was doing something I had no precedent for, not urgent, not demanding. Just present in a way he had not been present in 40 years, like something that had been waiting in a room and had heard a door open in another part of the house and turned its head. On the 4th day, I stopped in the hall where she was rehanging a tapestry that had slipped its rod, and I asked her whether the eastern guest quarters were fully prepared for the midwinter council visitors. She looked at me, not with alarm. She assessed the question, found it reasonable, and answered it. The east quarters were prepared, she said. She had checked them herself that morning because the regular attendant was down with the cold that had been working through the lower quarters, and she'd wanted to make sure nothing was missed. The fire grates were cleared and laid ready. The wool throws had been brought up from storage because the windows in that wing ran cold. She had done this, I understood, because she noticed gaps and filled them without being asked. Because she had looked at the situation and seen what was needed. "Thank you," I said. "My lord," she said, and turned back to the tapestry. I stood there for one more moment, just one, watching her work, and then I made myself leave. The dreams changed. Not the setting, still the stone chamber, still the pine forest beyond the window, still the snow falling in that weighted silence. But where the woman in the dream had always been slightly indistinct, slightly turned away, slightly at the edge of full clarity, now she was sharp. Now she was Senna Orrell, and she was standing at the window with her hands held in that inward curl I had catalogued, and she was looking at the falling snow, and I could see the scar. She did not turn, not yet. But in the dream I knew that she knew I was there, and that she was taking her time before turning, not because she was afraid, but because she was the kind of person who finished what they were looking at before they moved to the next thing. I woke from this dream with a feeling I had not had in 40 years. Not joy exactly, something larger than that and quieter, Like the moment before the iron month breaks and you can feel the cold beginning to give, even though nothing looks different yet. She was dreaming too. I did not know this yet. I am telling you the shape of the whole thing, as I came to understand it later, but in those first days I knew only what I could see. A face I recognized, a woman who did everything with quiet precision, and my wolf pressing steadily forward like water finding the low path. What I did not know was that in Tarn's Edge, for as long as she could remember, perhaps not 40 years, she was 34, but for as long as the dreams had substance in her from girlhood, she had been dreaming a man. A stone hall, a pine forest beyond tall windows, a man who stood with the particular stillness of someone who had long ago learned to contain what he felt, and who looked at her across the room as if she were something he had been expecting to see for a very long time. She had not had a name for the dream. She was a practical woman from a small settlement. She had not had time in 34 years of practical life to spend much of it wondering what her recurring dream meant. She had dreamed him, and then woken, and gone to work. The dreams were vivid and warm, and she did not speak of them to anyone because they were hers. She had arrived at Valdremer in the winter intake without expectation. She had come because the contract offered good wages and a dry roof, and the chance to save enough through the cold months to fix the drainage problem behind her mother's house. She had not come because she was looking for anything. And then on her second morning she had walked across the great hall with a stack of linens, navigating the uneven flagstones, and she had felt a stillness settle over the room that was different from the ordinary quiet of the hall. And she had not looked up because she was carrying linens across uneven stone, and she was not a person who looked up unnecessarily. She had thought about it later, the particular quality of that stillness. She had thought about it that night and filed it away and gone to sleep and dreamed the hall. Not the stone chamber. The great hall of Valdremer with the eastern hearth and the iron lanterns, and the man standing at the far end who had gone completely still when she crossed to the servants' corridor. She woke and lay in the dark of the shared staff room for a long time. She was a practical woman. She thought about what it meant and did not like her conclusions and set them aside and went to work. The council session was scheduled for the third week of the iron month. I had not intended it to be a significant session. Border levies, the Westholt petition, a review of the spring trade contracts, the sort of business that occupied my winters reliably and demanded nothing extraordinary. But the council had its own business and its own rhythms, and what the council intended for the third week of the iron month was what it had intended for a great many sessions over the past decade. It intended to press me on the matter of Aluna. They were not wrong to press. I knew they were not wrong. Valdremer needed continuity, and I was 70 years old, long-lived, as Alpha Kings tended to be, but not indefinitely so, and I had not yet bonded, and this was a legitimate concern. I understood it. I had never denied them their concern. I had simply declined every time to choose from the list. They came to the session prepared. I could see it in the way they arranged themselves, Councillor Veth Ardle in the center position that meant she planned to lead, 3 of the senior members flanking her with the careful placement of people who have rehearsed. They had a candidate, I had known they would. There had been the small signals for weeks, the particular quality of quiet that preceded a formal presentation. A woman of the Grenholm pack, ranking family, 30 years old, well-regarded. I had no objection to her as a person. I had no objection to any of them as people. I simply knew that none of them were the face I had been dreaming. Senna Orrell was not supposed to be in the session. The council sessions were served by a small rotation of senior household staff, 3 people, established, cleared for council room access, whose discretion was trusted. One of them had gone down with the cold that was working through the lower quarters. Someone in the household management had made a sensible substitution, pulling in the next available competent person from the winter intake. I did not know she was behind me until I heard the door, and then I heard the particular way she moved, unhurried, direct, no wasted motion, and I knew without looking. She set down the wine service at the side credenza and moved to stand at the wall out of the way, as servers in council sessions always did. Present but invisible, that was the form. I made myself look at Councillor Ardle. Veth Ardle had been on the council for 22 years, and she had a way of presenting arguments that built like stonework, each piece placed precisely before the next was added. And I had learned long ago to let her build. because interrupting her in the early stages only prolonged the process. She built the Grenholm match, the bloodline, the stability, the time that had passed. The duty, she did not use the word harshly. Ardal never used words harshly, but she let it stand. The duty of a king to his kingdom, the bond that Aluna brought, the generation it secured. I listened. My wolf was doing something I had no name for, not the forward press of recognition, that had been steady for days now, a constant thing I had learned to hold alongside the ordinary work of kingship. This was different. This was his attention shifting, sharpening, the way it sharpened when the thing he was orienting toward was very close. I knew what the Moon Seal was. Every Alpha King of Valdremar knew it, the way they knew the Hall and the passes and the old bondrites. It was one of the oldest marks in the mountain tradition, older than the current bond registry, older than the council itself. The old text said that when an Alpha King who carried the seal spoke the oath tongue in the presence of his true mate, the seal would wake on her wrist. Not a ceremony, not a test that could be arranged. A recognition, the bond's own evidence, given by something older than human management of such things. I had spoken the oath tongue in many council sessions over 40 years. Nothing had woken. I had also, in 40 years, never spoken it in the presence of the woman I had been dreaming. Ardal was concluding. She did it the way she did everything, with clean precision, laid the final piece and stepped back and let the structure stand. "Counselor Ardal," I said. I was aware of my voice in a way I was not usually aware of it. "I appreciate the council's position. I have always appreciated it. I want to respond to it properly, and I will. But there is a procedural matter I want to address first." I was reaching for something formal, something in the old language that would buy me a moment. "I want to enter the session's record with the oath declaration, as the charter requires when a matter of succession is formally raised. Let the record note that I speak the old form now." I spoke the old form. 17 words, in the oath tongue, the archaic mountain dialect that the formal charter preserved for exactly this kind of declaration. I had spoken it perhaps a dozen times over 40 years, in sessions where succession matters were formally tabled. My pronunciation was correct. I finished the phrase and moved to continue. The sound from behind me was small, involuntary, not loud. I turned. Senna Oral was standing at the wall, holding a service cloth in both hands, looking down at her left wrist with an expression I had never seen on a practical person before. An expression that had no practical reference. Something between awe and something almost like grief, as if a thing she had been telling herself was not real had just become undeniably real. Her wrist. The Moon Seal mark. It was the old sigil. I had seen it in the texts, in the historical records, the illustrated accounts of the twice in Valdremar's history that it had woken. A branching mark, like a winter tree, like the veining in pale stone, silver blue against her skin, and luminous, filling the room with a light that was not the iron lantern kind. The council was silent. I crossed the room. I did not think about the council. I did not think about Ardal, or the Grenholm match, or the agenda for the afternoon, or what any of this meant for the spring contracts. I moved from the head of the council table to the wall where she was standing, and I stopped in front of her and I looked at her wrist, and then I looked at her face. The face from 40 winters of dreaming in daylight, 3 feet from me, afraid and steady. She was holding still the way she always held still, not frozen, not rigid, but still the way still means when you are a person who does things with precision, when you are waiting to understand what the situation calls for before you act. "You don't have to be afraid," I said. My voice came out quiet. The council room was very still. "I know this must feel." "I know what it is," she said. Her voice was level. She was looking at her own wrist, the luminous branching mark, and then she looked up at me and she said it again, more quietly. "I know what it is." Something in her face that I recognized from the dream. Not the place, not the snow, but the quality of her looking. The completeness of her attention. "How long?" I asked. I meant, how long have you known? She understood the question. "I didn't know what I was dreaming," she said. "I didn't know until I came here, until I saw." A pause. The service cloth was still in her hands. She was holding it with that automatic care even now. The hall, the windows, I recognized them the second morning. The second morning, when she had crossed the great hall with her stack of linens, navigating the flagstones, not looking up. And I had gone still, and my wolf had gone still, and everything in me had known. I should close the session, I said. She nodded once, which was not really agreement, was more acknowledgement. Here is the form this situation calls for. I turned back to the council. Ardal was looking at the mark. 3 of the other council members were looking at the mark. The room had the quality of a room in which everyone is thinking very quickly and very quietly. The session is adjourned, I said. The succession matter is resolved. I took her from the council room myself. Not because she needed to be led, she would have found her own way anywhere she needed to go without assistance, but because I had not been this close to her in waking life before, and I was not yet ready for the space between us to increase. I am not usually a man who acts from that kind of reasoning. I am a man who acts from what is necessary and contained. But this was 40 years, and the dream and the face, and I was not yet ready. We walked through the great hall and down the east passage, and then I stopped, because I did not know where I was taking her, and she stopped beside me, and we stood in the east passage in the light from the clear-story windows with the snow coming down outside. There's a chamber, I said. Below the hall, the moon-sealed chamber. The texts describe it as the traditional place for what comes next, formally. I stopped. But I don't want to do this formally, not if you'd rather not. She looked at me, assessing. Not suspicious, assessing, the way she assessed the guest quarters and the tapestry and the state of the flagstones. What does formally mean? She asked. A ceremony, witnesses, the bond registry. The council would prefer. What do you prefer? I looked at her for a moment. I prefer, I said slowly, to go somewhere quiet and talk to you. She considered this, then she said, all right. The moon-sealed chamber was 3 levels below the great hall, cut into the mountain's base in the era before Valdremer's upper structures existed. It was cold and old, and it smelled of stone and the particular kind of time that accumulates in places used for significant things. I had been in it perhaps 4 times in my life, always for formal purposes, always with the council. Now I came in with a single lantern and a border village woman who had served linens in my hall for 2 weeks, and who had been dreaming me, apparently, since she was old enough to dream. I set the lantern on the old stone table, and she stood on the other side of it, and we looked at each other. The mark was still luminous on her wrist. In the chamber's deep quiet it seemed brighter, as if the room recognized it. 40 years, I said. Yes, she waited. I have dreamed your face for 40 years. The same face. The same chamber, not this one, a different one with a pine forest beyond the window. Always the same. You at the window, turning, saying something I could never hold past waking. She was very still. 3 words, she said. I looked at her, what? In the dream, what I say, it's 3 words. She looked down at the mark on her wrist and then back at me. I didn't know you couldn't hear them. I thought, a pause. I thought you could hear them. I've been saying them for a very long time. I had been dreaming her for 40 winters, and for 40 winters those 3 words had dissolved the moment I woke, and I had never known she was saying them, and she had never known I wasn't hearing them. Tell me now, I said. She told me. They were 3 words in the old tongue, the same archaic mountain dialect I had spoken in the council session, the oath tongue, and they were the first half of the traditional bond acknowledgement, the part that the mate speaks first. The part I had never heard in the dream because I was always waking before she turned. I knew the second half. Every Alpha King of Valdremer learned it, the way they learned the charter and the land registers and the old rights. The second half, which the king speaks in answer. I spoke it. The chamber went luminous for a moment, both of us. The old mark on her wrist and something older than a mark, older than the registry, older than the council's lists of suitable candidates, older than 40 winters. The kind of thing that does not care about calendars or border villages or how long it took 2 people to find the same room while waking. Then it settled, and the chamber was just a chamber again, cold stone and lantern light, and the 2 of us on either side of the old table. She let out a breath, long and slow, like someone who has been holding something for a very long time. I didn't know what I was going to find when I came here, she said. I came for the wages, for my mother's drainage. I know, I said. I'm glad you came for the drainage. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen before, startled almost, and then something softer, as if she had not expected a 70-year-old Alpha King to say something that was genuinely slightly funny. Is it? She stopped. started again. I know what the mark means. I'm not ignorant of what I'm being asked. But I want to be sure you understand that I'm a border village woman with no rank and no wolf gift on record, and your counsel just spent an hour making the case for someone from Grenholm and— My counsel, I said, just watched the Moonseal wake for the first time in living memory. They will have several weeks of adjustment ahead of them, and they are equipped for it. I paused. I am not asking you to be the Grenholm match. I am not asking you to be anything you have not chosen. I am asking you whether, now that we are both awake and in the same room and the dream is no longer required, you would like to stay. She looked at me for a long moment. The mark on her wrist had settled to a low silver warmth, not the blazing luminosity of the first waking, but a steady, quiet light. The kind of light that is not performing anything. The kind that is simply there because it belongs. I think, she said carefully, I would need to send word to Tarn's Edge about my mother's drainage. And I would want to know that my contract obligations from the winter intake are discharged properly, because the household management should know how to account for the change. We will send word, I said, and I will speak to the household management. Then yes, she said, I would like to stay. We were in that chamber for a long time. Not in silence. She was not a woman who used silence for its own sake, and I had not spoken freely with anyone in more years than I wanted to count, and there was a great deal to say. I told her about the 40 winters of the dream. She told me about the years of dreaming the man in the stone hall who never seemed to hear her. She told me about Tarn's Edge, the trappers and small-hold farmers, her mother's house, the drainage problem she had been trying to solve for 2 seasons, the practical calculus of the winter contract. She asked me questions about Valdremar and the passes and the eastern trade routes with the same directness she used for everything, and she listened to the answers the way she listened to everything, completely, with that quality of stillness that made the room feel quieter. My wolf was doing something I had no precedent for. Content, I thought. The word seemed too small. Complete was closer. The forward press of 40 years, the directional certainty that had built since she walked across the great hall with her linens, it had settled. Not gone. Present the way things are present when they have arrived. At some point, the lantern burned lower, and we were sitting on the old stone bench rather than standing at the table. And she was looking at the mark on her wrist in the low light, with that expression of someone taking in a thing that will need to be taken in for some time before it is fully absorbed. I kept telling myself the dream was just a dream, she said. So did I said. You're 70 years old and an alpha king. You could have had anyone. Yes, I said. I waited anyway. She looked at me, then she looked back at the mark. I'm going to need different clothes, she said. For whatever comes next, I didn't bring anything for I came for a seasonal contract. We will find you different clothes, I said. Or the same ones if you prefer. Nothing about what you wear changes the mark. She thought about this. I was always going to say yes to you, she said. In the dream, when I turned, that's what the 3 words were. It wasn't an acknowledgement of the bond. I didn't know what the bond was. I didn't grow up with the old texts. It was just yes. I was always going to say yes. Something in my chest that had been tightly held for 40 winters. I know, I said. I just could never hear it. She turned and looked at me in the lantern light, and her face was exactly the face from the dream. And she was awake, and so was I, and we were in the same room. You can hear it now, she said. The council adjusted. Ardal was pragmatic. She had always been pragmatic, and the Moonseal was not an argument she was equipped to contest, which she acknowledged with the kind of clean directness I had always valued in her. The Grenholm match was withdrawn gracefully. I wrote to that family myself with appropriate acknowledgement of their candidate's qualities and the assurance that Valdremar would continue its relationship with their pack. These things could be managed. They were managed. The winter household staff learned, in the way of tight-knit establishments, before any formal announcement was made. Senna was regarded with a range of expressions, surprise, curiosity, something in some quarters that might have shaded toward resentment at the disruption of an understood order. And she responded to all of it the same way she responded to everything, by doing her work with quiet precision and being kind to people, not because it was politic, but because it was her nature. The mark on her wrist was not something anyone disputed once they had seen it. There was a ceremony in the end because there needed to be, the charter required it, the bond registry required it, and the broader pack needed a moment to understand what had changed. We kept it as simple as it could be in the great hall, with the council as witnesses and the household staff gathered at the sides. And Senna Oral of Tarn's Edge stood beside me in a gray wool gown she had apparently approved of because it was warm and practical, and we spoke the old words in front of everyone. The mark blazed briefly as it had in the council room. The hall went quiet. She stood through it the way she stood through everything, composed, steady, not performing anything. When it was done, she looked at me and gave me a small, precise nod, which meant, "Here is the form this situation called for, and here it is, cleanly done." I understood her, I realized. I had been dreaming her for 40 winters without knowing her, and now that I knew her, I understood her completely. The way you understand a language when you have been hearing it long enough that it has entered you without your noticing. That first night, our first real night, after the ceremony, after the council had dispersed, and the hall had quieted, and the snow had been falling for hours in the deep iron month silence, she stood at the window of my chamber. The window faced east, toward the pine forest, and the snow was falling the way it fell in the dream, with that particular silence that meant the winter was fully itself. She was looking at it with her hands held in that inward curl, both wrists turned slightly in, the mark on the left one a quiet silver warmth in the dark. I had seen this before. I had seen it 10,000 times. I had woken from it 10,000 times into the empty dark of my chamber with the words gone and only the face remaining. She did not turn immediately. She was taking her time, the way she always took her time, finishing what she was looking at before she moved to the next thing. Then she turned, and she said something. Not 3 words, more than 3 words, a full sentence, quiet and direct, in the ordinary language, not the oath tongue, just her voice in the winter dark, saying what she was saying to me and not to a dream. I heard every word. I will not tell you what they were. They were hers to say and mine to keep, but I will tell you that I did not wake. The snow fell outside the east window, and the pine forest stood in the dark, and the iron month held Valdremer in its full cold weight, and I did not wake, because there was nothing to wake from. We were already here,